It was the middle of summer, the time when the days stretched endlessly and the nights were warm with possibility. School was out, and our senior year was creeping closer, bringing with it the weight of impending adulthood. My best friend Eric and I wanted one last adventure before the mundane cycle of homework, college applications, and football games resumed. We needed something to make this summer unforgettable, something that would etch itself into our memories forever.
That's how we ended up on the outskirts of town, in a decayed neighborhood no one spoke about anymore. These abandoned streets were nothing but remnants of a failed suburban expansion, a place left to rot after a massive fire had swept through it years ago. Most of the houses stood in blackened ruin, their charred skeletons looming under the summer sun. Others were barely standing, their roofs caved in, their walls crumbling from neglect. But at the very end of the street stood the house. Unlike the others, this one remained mostly intact. Its structure stood tall, defiant against time and decay, though its windows were shattered, the jagged glass in the frames resembling broken teeth. The front door had long since vanished, leaving behind a gaping entryway cloaked in darkness. But what caught our attention was the slightly ajar back door, an open invitation that neither of us could resist.
Eric grinned, his eyes flashing with excitement. This is it. One last thrill before school starts.
I hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Let's do it. Before going further with the story, if you could consider liking and subscribing, it really does help me create these type of videos. Let's get back to the story.
Stepping inside, the first thing I noticed was the suffocating silence. The air was thick with the scent of mildew, decay, and something else I couldn't quite place. Dust motes swirled in the dim light filtering through the shattered windows. Clothes were strewn across the floor, some clean, others covered in stains of unknown origin.
Eric nudged an empty backpack with his foot. Weird, he muttered.
Curious, I knelt down and unzipped another one. It was military grade, its fabric rough and sturdy despite its age. Inside, I found papers. Official-looking documents stamped with government insignia. My breath hitched as I skimmed through them, noting a heavily redacted name and the words honorable discharge and mental health evaluation required.
Dude, I whispered, my stomach twisting. These belong to a soldier. Before Eric could respond,
we froze. The unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Someone was up there. It wasn't an animal and definitely wasn't the house settling. A person. And they were pacing back and forth. I shot Eric a look, hoping he'd suggest leaving. Instead, his grin widened. Let's check it out. Despite my instincts screaming at me to turn around and run, I followed him up the creaking staircase. Each step groaned beneath our weight. The second floor was even more unsettling than the first. The walls were covered in deep, erratic scratches, as if someone had desperately tried to claw their way out. The doors to the rooms hung open, revealing wreckage beyond, tattered mattresses, upturned furniture, more scattered clothing.
Then we heard it.
Breathing, deep, ragged, and unmistakably human. It came from behind the last door at the end of the hallway. Eric reached for the doorknob. Wait, I whispered, grabbing his arm. Too late. He pushed the door open. The stench hit us first. A foul combination of sweat, rot, and something metallic. The room was a disaster zone. Old blankets were piled in the corner, like a makeshift bed. Empty food cans and dirty water bottles littered the floor. Military gear, rusted knives, a shattered helmet, and dog tags with the name scratched off was scattered across the room. But what made my stomach lurch were the walls.
Hundreds of notes were scrawled across them in uneven, desperate handwriting.
They're still watching. They follow me. The war never ended, never sleep, never stop.
Then, from the closet, a creak.
I turned slowly. The closet door was slightly ajar, and inside, crouched among the shadows, was a man. His face was gaunt, his skin stretched tight over his bones. His hair was patchy, his eyes sunken and wild, and he was smiling.
You shouldn't have come here,
he rasped.
Then he lunged. Eric and I stumbled back, barely avoiding his grasp. The man moved with unnerving speed, his jerky, erratic movements making him seem almost inhuman. Eric slammed the door shut just as the man crashed into it. "Run!" I shouted. We bolted down the hall, his footsteps thunderous behind us. He was fast, too fast. We reached the stairs just as he burst through the door, a rusted knife clutched in his bony fingers. Our only exit was the back door.
We reached it. I yanked the handle, locked. I pulled harder, nothing. The door refused to budge. Behind us, the man whispered.
You boys don't know how to leave well enough alone.
Eric and I spun around. He was standing barely 3 feet away, his grin stretching wider, his eyes gleaming with madness.
Eric grabbed my arm. The basement.
We darted toward the basement door and flung it open, tumbling down the stairs into the suffocating darkness. The air was damp, the smell of rot nearly unbearable. Desperate, I fumbled along the walls until my fingers scraped against something. Plywood. A boarded-up window. Eric grabbed a rusted pipe and swung at it. The wood cracked again. Above us, footsteps. He was coming. The boards finally gave way, revealing a small opening just big enough to crawl through. Eric shoved me forward. "Go!" I squeezed through, feeling splinters scrape my arms. Eric was halfway through when the man's hand clamped onto his ankle. Eric screamed. I grabbed him, yanking with every ounce of strength I had. The man snarled, his grip tightening. Eric kicked him in the face.
Again, the man finally let loose of his grip on Eric's ankle.
Eric scrambled through the opening, and we didn't stop running. Our car was parked at the end of the street. We sprinted toward it, lungs burning, the house shrinking behind us. Then, footsteps. Fast, too fast. I risked a glance back. He was chasing us barefoot, knife still in hand, his grin never fading. I fumbled with the keys as we reached the car. Eric wrenched the door open, shoving me inside. The man was 10 feet away. The engine roared to life. The tires screeched as we peeled out, his figure disappearing in the rearview mirror. But as we drove away, I realized something. He had stopped running. He just stood there, watching, smiling, as if he knew we'd be back. I never should have moved into that house. It was cheap, yes. But something about it felt off the moment I stepped inside. The realtor said it had been vacant for years. The previous owner had moved out suddenly, left everything behind. That should have been my first warning. The rain had been relentless for days, hammering the roof like an omen. The place creaked and groaned, but it was old, so I chalked it up to the weather. The first few nights were quiet, until I heard the noises. A slow, deliberate, dragging sound from the attic. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was an animal, maybe a raccoon. But then, on the third night, I heard something different. A whisper. Not the wind. Not the rain. A voice. Someone was in my attic. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound made my skin crawl. I kept the bedroom door locked and gripped the baseball bat I kept by my bed. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As soon as the sun rose, I grabbed a flashlight and yanked down the attic ladder. My heart pounded as I climbed up, one slow step at a time. The attic was the same as I'd left it. Dusty boxes, cobwebs, a rocking chair in the corner. I swung the flashlight around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. Nothing. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, fresh ones in the dust. They led from the attic hatch to a stack of boxes. My throat tightened. Someone had been here, but where were they now? I didn't stay to find out. I climbed down, locked the attic door, and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. But I wasn't. That night, the noises came back. This time, they were closer. I lay in bed, listening, my heart hammering from the sound of soft creaks, then a faint rustling, like fabric shifting. Then,
I felt my blood go cold. The sound wasn't coming from above, it was coming from the closet. I shot out of bed, gripping the bat so tightly my knuckles ached. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for the closet handle. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just clothes swaying slightly from my sudden movement. But something was wrong. I pushed aside the hanging jackets and ran my hand along the back wall. Then, I felt it. A gap. My breath caught. There was a hidden panel. With trembling fingers, I pushed against it. It slid open an inch, revealing a sliver of darkness beyond. A foul, stale smell drifted out. A passage. And then, something moved behind the wall. I stumbled back, slamming the closet shut. My whole body was shaking. Someone was inside my house, living inside my walls. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my room, clutching my bat, waiting for the sun to rise. Morning came, but I didn't feel safe. I needed to see what was behind that panel. I needed to know. Armed with a knife this time, I slid the panel open. My flashlight illuminated a narrow, filthy crawl space, just big enough for someone to move through. The walls were covered in scratches. Old food wrappers, empty water bottles, and dirty blankets were piled in the corner. Someone had been living here for a long time. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat. That's when I saw the hole in the floor. A small opening leading downward, straight into the attic. I wasn't just dealing with some squatter. This person had been moving through my house, watching me, hiding just beyond the walls. And they weren't alone. Because beneath the garbage and rags, I saw something else. A notebook. I flipped it open, hands trembling. The pages were filled with names and dates. The last entry, dated the week I moved in, had my name scrawled in uneven handwriting. Beside it, a single word. Mine. I slammed the notebook shut, heart racing. That's when I heard it. A breath right behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam shaking, and I saw him, a man, gaunt, wild-eyed, covered in grime, crawling out of the hole in the floor. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, his mouth stretching into a grin. "You found me," he rasped. I didn't think. I ran. Scrambling out of the crawl space, I tumbled into my room, slamming the closet shut behind me. I grabbed the dresser and shoved it in front of the door, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Silence. Then, the closet door shook. I backed away, hands shaking. I needed to get out. My phone, I had left it in the kitchen. Bang, bang. The dresser scraped forward an inch. I bolted. I sprinted down the hallway, nearly slipping on the wooden floor. The house felt too quiet, like it was holding its breath. I reached the kitchen, snatched my phone off the counter, and fumbled to dial 911. That's when I heard the attic door creak open. He wasn't in the closet anymore. He was above me. And then he dropped down. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. The police found me outside in the pouring rain, clutching my knife with white-knuckled fingers. They found him, too. The man had been living in the house for years. He had carved tunnels between the attic, the walls, and even the basement. He had watched me from the moment I moved in, creeping through the walls at night, listening, waiting. The officers told me I was lucky, that if I had stayed another night, things could have ended differently. I moved out the next day. But even now, in a new home, in a new city, I can't shake the feeling that someone is still watching.